Thank you. Our second speaker in opposition of the motion is Tal Cohen. Tal is a second-year undergraduate student reading history and politics at Wilson College. Tal, you have the ears of the House. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, the phrase Western intervention in the Middle East carries the weight of Iraq, of oil pipelines, of drones in the sky, of disaster. And rightly so, the West has made disastrous decisions. But this motion doesn't ask whether the West has always intervened wisely. It asks whether the West should regret intervening at all, whether the very idea of Western intervention is inherently wrong. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a much more dangerous proposition. Because if we vote for this motion, if we say that the West, by virtue of its history, its geography, its sins, should never act again, then we're not just condemning the past, but we're making a decision about the future. We are saying that when people are slaughtered, when dictators unleash chemical weapons, when civilians are starved into submission, the West must simply watch. Not because it cannot help, but because it's decided that it shouldn't. We seem to be living in an age of historical self-flagellation, where every Western intervention is presumed guilty until proven innocent. Now, there's a bitter irony here. Parts of the left, once the fierce advocates for international solidarity, have drifted into a strange, isolationist cul-de-sac, parroting the language of reactionaries while cloaking themselves in the vocabulary of post-colonial guilt. They howl at the West for intervening in conflicts abroad. Yes?
You say all those things about the times the West is caused, but what should the rest of the world do when the US does it?
I mean, I'll get into it. Again, as I said, the West isn't perfect, it's made mistakes. That doesn't mean we shouldn't improve. And it also doesn't give everyone else a free pass to could just do atrocities all the time. As I was saying, they howl at the West for intervening in conflicts abroad, decrying it as neo-imperialism, but offer no serious alternatives when actual lives hang in the balance. Let's begin with a simple case. It's August 2014. ISIL has overrun northern Iraq. Thousands of Yazidis, men, women, and children are trapped on Mount Sinjar, surrounded, starving, facing extermination. The Iraqi army has collapsed. The UN is impotent. No surprises there. Regional powers are watching from the sidelines. And then the West intervenes. US airstrikes halt the ISIL advance. British aid drops keep people alive. That was Western intervention, not for profit, not for oil, not for empire, but because nobody else would act. Would we honestly prefer inaction in that moment? Should we have stood by instead and said, sorry, it's a bit awkward for us to get involved. We've done some bad things in the past and we're on our self-improvement journey. To reject that action on principle would be to condemn thousands to death for the sake of ideological purity. There's this growing impulse, not just in our generation, but predominantly in our generation, a kind of inherited shame to apologize for the wrongdoings of generations before us, to denounce our past as irredeemably tainted, as if the sins of our ancestors leave an indelible stain. Just last week here at the Union, a member of the audience declared that Britain had nothing to be proud of about her history because our history is, and I quote, shit. This is a child's view of morality. It's a demand for perfection where none can exist. Nations, like people, have their moments of cruelty, their catastrophic failures, their unforgivable wrongs. But we don't judge a person solely by the mistakes they made in their youth, nor do we reduce a lifetime to its lowest moments. We judge them by the totality of their actions, by their capacity for self-correction. To reject Western intervention on the basis of past sins is to demand moral purity at the cost of moral action. And that's a self-indulgent luxury we simply cannot afford in a world where tyrants still gas children and fanatics still enslave women. This debate isn't about Western ego. It's about what happens when no one else will intervene. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. In a world where global institutions are weak and regional powers are often complicit, the West is frequently the only force capable of responding to atrocities at scale. And no, that's not some Western exceptionalist fantasy. Yes.
Why does the West not intervene in Palestine?
Oh, I'm going to get to that, don't worry. The legal and moral framework for intervention is global. States are sovereign, but sovereignty is not a blank check. It ends where mass atrocity begins. That's not my opinion, it's the logic behind the UN's responsibility to protect, which was adopted by 191 countries in 2005. That's not just the West, that's nearly every nation on Earth. The difference is that the West, for better or worse, is often the only bloc powerful enough to actually do anything. The world agreed. When a state fails to protect its own people, or worse, becomes the threat, intervention is justified. So, like the gentleman here said, when Bashar al-Assad gasses his own civilians in Ghouta, when Saddam Hussein drops chemical weapons on the Kurds in Halabja, when Gaddafi promises to cleanse Benghazi house by house, do we really regret getting involved? Would we rather let those dictators proceed unopposed? Should we just light a candle and draft another UN resolution? I'm going to carry on, thank you. Of course, the West has misjudged how to intervene. Iraq was a disaster, a masterclass in how not to intervene. Western policymakers walked into Baghdad with no plan, no legitimacy, no understanding of the region or the religious divides and centuries-old grudges they were stepping into. Hang on. There we go. But the fact that the West sometimes misjudges how to intervene doesn't mean it has no right to intervene at all. Regret the mistakes, yes, but regret the principle of intervention itself? No, we learn, no thank you, we reform, we intervene better, not never. And on that note, this idea that Western morals are subjective and that therefore to intervene cannot possibly be the objectively right thing to do is ludicrous. It's not a Western perspective to say that chemical warfare is wrong, that slavery is wrong, that public lashings, forced veiling, and gender apartheid are wrong. These are not cultural quirks, and they are not alternatives to liberal democracy, they are abuses. The idea that we should stay silent in the face of them because we might appear culturally insensitive is not principled. And no thank you. And yes, the West has failed to live up to its own standards. Yes, it has been hypocritical. But hypocrisy is not proof that the principle is wrong. It's proof that we've fallen short of it. Better a hypocrite with values than a cynic with none. Let's talk about Gaza, because everyone else seems to have something to say. We've seen the protests, thousands of people marching, demanding an end to what they call a genocide, demanding that the West intervene by withdrawing support, by exerting pressure, by stepping in. Now, wait a minute. You say the West has no right to intervene, but when it doesn't intervene in the way that you like, you accuse it of betrayal? Where were these voices when hundreds of thousands of Syrians were slaughtered by their own regime, when the Iranian regime shot teenagers in the street, when Saudi Arabia bombed weddings in Yemen? If you're out... Yes? Where's that come from?
This is actually me this time. I mean, those same activists were out on the streets demanding that Western countries stop funding Saudi Arabia. To pull away support isn't the same type of intervention that we're talking about. It's entirely different worlds.
But you don't just want to pull... You don't just want to pull away support from Israel, okay? What you're talking about is intervention in Gaza, but this doesn't make sense. If Western involvement is really always evil, then leave Gaza to its fate. But of course, no one actually believes that. Because, no, thank you, I need to finish. Because deep down, we do want intervention, we just want it when it suits us, and like you said, on our terms. I need to finish, thank you. We just don't want to admit that we want it. As Dr. Kettle addressed, I need to finish, as I said. As Dr. Kettle addressed, the fact that intervention does not always mean boots on the ground. It does not always mean occupation. It does not always mean invasion or regime change. I need to finish, thank you. It can mean humanitarian aid. It can mean sanctions. It can mean airlifting civilians, training local forces, enforcing no-fly zones. It can mean doing just enough to stop atrocity and give people a chance to breathe. And that, ultimately, is what this debate comes down to. Not whether the West has always done good, it hasn't. Not whether the West always intervenes for the right reasons, it doesn't. But whether in a broken world, where the cost of inaction can be hundreds of thousands of lives, the West has the right, and I would argue the responsibility, to try. Because I say that if we abandon that right, we abandon the people who depend on it. If we say the West must never intervene, then we say to the next Yazidis, the next Syrians, the current girls under Taliban rule, your suffering is not our problem, while we debate moral relativism in comfortable rooms. Oppose this motion. Thank you.